This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICG's Digital Academy webinar series. I'm Sally Alsop, the ICG committee member responsible for the ICG webinar programme. So for today's webinar, we're delighted to welcome Andrew Lebrouilly, founder of ArrowStream, and Colin Wojtowicz, founder of DataWatch. Andrew has over 15 years of experience working in data visualization and market research, as well as delivering training for clients and for Royal Holloway's MBA and MSc programs. He particularly specializes in taking large-scale, complex surveys and creating intuitive, interactive dashboards for global market research companies. Andrew recently led ArrowStream to become finalists of the ASC MRS Best Technology Innovation Award 2022 for their new product that rapidly prepares survey data for dashboarding and reporting tools. Colin is an expert in visualizing business and research data into actionable insight and has experience of delivering many successful data visualization consultancy projects. He has spent many years delivering research and intelligence to inform local government service planning and delivery, and specializes in survey design, analysis, and reporting to understand stakeholder opinion. As a certified Tableau data analyst, he creates insightful data visualizations and interactive dashboards within Tableau Desktop. So in this ICG webinar, Andrew and Colin will be sharing some tips that you can immediately apply to your work, as well as introducing you to some shortcuts for designing insightful dashboards for the market research industry. They're happy to take questions as they go along. So if you'd like to ask a question, please either turn on your webcam and raise your hand, or type your comments, questions in the chat box if you'd like one of us to do that for you. So we're really grateful to Rigor Research for sponsoring this webinar. Rigor Research partnering with ICG members to deliver very competitively priced fieldwork, data, and advanced analytics in record time globally. Before I hand over to Andrew and Colin, here are some more webinars and events we've planned for you over the next few weeks. Don't forget that we're able to offer great value sponsorship opportunities with each of our webinars and online events. Please contact Lucy if you'd like to know more. So now I'll hand over to Colin, I think first, but Colin and Andrew are speakers today.
Okay, thanks, Sally.
Oops. There we go. Should be over to you now, Colin.
Okay, sharing my screen.
That's great.
Can you see the slides yet?
Perfect. That's great. I'll go on mute.
Phew, good. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending. So, first of all, we're going to be talking about data visualization. Is it an art or is it a science? So, defining data visualization, it's the representation and presentation of data to facilitate understanding. And there's three different stages to that. First of all, we perceive data. What does it show us? For example, are we looking at big numbers, small numbers? Are we looking to compare different categories? Or are we looking at relationships between different variables? Then the next stage is that we interpret the data. What does it mean? What's good, what's bad, what's meaningful, what's significant? Are things unexpected coming out of the data? And finally, comprehending. What does it mean to me? What's the key message that I'm trying to get across? What lessons have I learned? And what actions, if any, need to be taken? And we have three different memory systems to go through this process. First of all, we have what's called an iconic memory. And this is where we process all the different visual information that we see with our eyes. So we see the world in terms of objects, size, shape, color. That information is then pushed into a short-term memory. Our short-term memory can hold about 3 to 8 different visual objects at any one time for up to 30 seconds. And then as new visual information comes in from the iconic memory, the short-term memory will then save anything that's meaningful into a longer-term memory system. Anything that isn't meaningful, we forget. Once it's in our long-term memory, this is where we store memories of the past, all the things that we've learned, and we turn those into narratives about our experience. So when we want to communicate complex information about data to an audience, we want to make it as easy as possible for them to understand that information. We want to maximize insight with a minimal amount of effort. And to do that, we need to tap into this iconic memory. And we do that through a process known as pre-attentive processing. So these are pre-attentive attributes. They're sort of visual properties that we see in the world around us. And they're things like length, for example, size, shape, position, and color. And they are processed in this iconic memory of ours subconsciously, instantly, without us even thinking about it. So we've got a little exercise in visual processing. I want you to count the number of 5s that you see in this table of numbers, and maybe put it in the chat. And Andrew, if you're there, if you could just see what sort of numbers people put in, please.
We haven't got any just yet.
Okay. this is
All
kind of
got
proving
6.
the point.
We got 6 and 8, 7
Can you
and 8.
repeat the question? Was it the number of 9s?
5, sorry, number of 5s.
5s.
5s, yeah.
We have 3 saying 8, 2 saying 7, 1 saying 6.
Okay.
Another 8's come through.
Okay, so maybe it's looking like 8 is coming through, but I think probably what we're finding is it's quite a difficult task to do. We're having to work through each of the numbers in turn and process them in that short-term memory, and we're processing them attentively. We're having to put a lot of kind of cognitive effort in. So what about now? If so, I think the answer is correct. Yeah, there's 8 5s. So well done to anyone who guessed that. So what we've now done, it's the same table of data, but we've stripped out all of the sort of unimportant information. We've pushed that into the background, and then we've used color to embolden the important information to bring that to the surface. And hopefully you find that, this is a lot easier for us to visualize. And that's because we're now using our iconic memory to process the information sort of unconsciously without even thinking about it. And our challenge really is, how can we use this knowledge of pre-attentive processing in our chart design? Okay, here's another game for you. How much bigger is circle B compared to circle A? So again, if you could put your answers in the chat, please.
Got 15 come through. 15 times bigger. 10 times bigger. Yeah. 12, 10. 12 again. 8. All sorts. I love these. You always see them in the Times newspaper. They love a good bubble chart.
Yeah. Let's see. Thanks for that, guys. Let's see what the answer is. The answer is actually 16 times as big. 16 times as big in terms of area. It's 4 times as big in terms of the diameter. And most people tend to guess around between 10 and 13, which I think is represented by the answers we got there. And the reason for this is because our brains naturally tend to underestimate differences in relative areas. We're not particularly effective at doing that. And so any charts that are based on comparing relative areas, there's a high risk that actually, when we're comparing things, we can mislead our audience. So we need to be careful. For example, we've got two charts here. One's a pie chart on the left, and we've got a bar chart, and they're both showing a breakdown of sales by types of wine. And the question is, are the sales of Pinot Grigio smaller, larger, or the same as Sauvignon Blanc? Okay, so again, if you want to just drop some answers quickly in the chat.
We've got larger a bit. Larger, same.
Okay, the answer is it's larger. So if we look at Pinot Grigio compared to Sauvignon Blanc, I think what hopefully you'll find is that when you're using a pie chart, then it's quite difficult to compare the difference in size when the size of the segments are quite similar. And this goes back to our example with the bubbles in terms of it's difficult for our brains to calculate differences when we're basing it on area alone. Hopefully you find it's a bit easier to see that Pinot Grigio is higher than Sauvignon Blanc using the bar chart. And the reason for this is that it's tapping into this pre-attentive attribute of length. Our brains are really naturally very good at judging differences in length. And it's for this reason that pie charts generally are considered actually not that good in terms of accuracy compared to, say, bar charts, which are used all the time. So again, how can we use some of this knowledge in our chart design? Well, let's look at a data table. Data tables are still really popular. People love them. This particular table, we're looking at sales and profit by product category and subcategory across 4 different regions. We're interested in maybe looking at where sales are low or if certain products are unprofitable. But again, hopefully, compared to like when you were counting the number of 5s, you can see it's quite difficult to pick out that information because it's just like a lot of numbers and we have to go through and sort of, manually try and understand what the data is telling us. So how can we make it a little bit clearer? Let's add a splash of color and turn it into a highlight table. Highlight tables are sort of considered like the gateway into data visualization. They tap in to the pre-attentive attribute of color. And now hopefully you can see at a glance where sales are low or high, and certain products like binders, for example, in central region are unprofitable. But it's still quite a lot of visual information to process. So can we make it even clearer? And to do that, we need to consider something called the data ink ratio. And this is defined as the amount of data ink divided by the total ink required to print the graphic. And there's a guy called Edward Tufte, who some of you may have heard of, who came up with it in 1983. So our goal is to really make the data stand out, and we can do that by eliminating visual clutter. So the first thing we want to do is get rid of any visual elements on our charts that don't add to our understanding and potentially could even distract our audience. So sometimes this is known as chart junk. And let's look at the example of our friend Mr. Penguin here. So this chart is showing the body mass of different types of penguin, but actually we don't really need that image. It's not adding anything to our understanding of the data, although I think Mr. Penguin is quite cute. So, you may want to keep him in for that reason. The second thing we want to do is reduce the amount of ink we're actually using on our charts. And we do that by getting rid of things like labels that we don't need. So for example, on the chart on the right, we don't need grams in the title because it's already in the chart labels. And we don't need this chart legend on the left because the colors are already clearly labeled. So the result is a much clearer message, and it saves our audience time to get to their insights, and it also saves valuable space on our visualization as well. So going back to our sales and profit visualization, we can add some more pre-attentive attributes. So we can use bar length to show sales, and we can then add profit to color to show where items are sort of unprofitable. And by doing that, we reduce the need for having 2 color legends, so that cleans up the visual. We can also remove things like grid lines, column headers, data labels on the bars, anything like that, that we, it informs the visual, but we don't actually need them. And the end result, hopefully, is a much clearer visualization than when we were just looking at a highlight table or just a sort of like, a data table of data. Okay, so we've talked a lot about science of data visualization. Let's look at the artistic side of it. So in this particular chart, it's a market research chart looking at a market research survey, a customer survey, and it's looking at a clothing store, and it's looking at the percentage of customers who are favorable of store offers. The dots that are coloured blue refer to our store, and the dots that are orange refer to our competitors' stores. It's quite a nice chart, I think, a dot connected dot plot, but it's not actually kind of telling us too much. It's a bit descriptive. So how can we design it to get our message across clearer? Well, first of all, what we're actually really interested in is this gap. It's the gap between our store and all our competitors. So let's redesign the chart into a diverging bar chart, but this time we're looking at that the metric is the difference between our store and our competitors. And when the bar goes to the right, we're overperforming in terms of customer satisfaction. And when it goes to the left, we're underperforming. And then we can reinforce that by using color as well to color code levels of performance. But then how can we tell an engaging story from our data? And an engaging story will have a plot. It will normally have some tension in terms of there's a problem which we're trying to articulate with the data, but then it'll have some resolution in terms of a solution to the problem that we're going to recommend. So what we've done here is add some text, some annotation, color coded along with the bars to say, okay, these are things that we want to celebrate, good news. These are issues where there's room for improvement, and this is our recommended action. And we're going to tie that back into a nice call to action in our chart title as well. Okay, so have we got any questions at this stage before I hand over to Andrew, please?
We've got no questions in the chat at the moment. I don't know if anybody wants to come off mute and ask a question that they may have.
Okay, so with that, shall I hand over to you, Andrew?
Yeah, sure. Fantastic. Hello, everyone. So when I first started,
can I just ask a question? Sorry, I'm a bit slow to this. What was the software that you were using for producing these charts? Was that just standard PowerPoint, or were you using anything special?
Everything's produced in Tableau, and then I've exported that as an image into PowerPoint.
Okay.
And if you want to have a go on Tableau yourself, there's something called Tableau Public, which is free to use, and it has all the functionality of the sort of Tableau desktop.
Perfect. Thanks for that question, Sally. Yeah, as I was saying, when I first started doing data visualization and producing things like dashboards, there seemed to be a lot of confusion about what things actually were. So people used to come to me and say, oh, I really want a dashboard. And it's just like, okay, what do you mean by that? Because there's not really a very clear definition in terms of what a dashboard means. So I started coming up with these 3 different types just to help us categorize what people were actually looking for. So the infographic is what you commonly see in a magazine. The dashboard is something that's quite interactive. And then there's something which I've called an explorer, which allows you to kind of get into the detail of the data. And the thing is, with these 3 different types, it requires almost very different skills to get into it. It seems counterintuitive, but the easiest one of these to actually produce is the explorer, because here you're actually just giving people the ability to explore that data. So giving them a few filters allows them to pick and choose between the different questions. And so it's very easy for someone like Colin and I to create one of these, and for you to have a go. The dashboard, it requires a lot more thought, because we need to uncover what are the actual key things which someone looking at the dashboard really needs to learn. So what's the primary objective for that dashboard? So who's going to be using it? What decisions do they need to make? And how can we aid their understanding and almost preempt what their questions are going to be, so that we can provide interaction between it? And then the infographic, I think, is by far the hardest one to create. It sounds like I'm mad, but for an infographic, you need to have done all of the previous steps. So you need to have collected the data, analyzed the data, found out what are those key messages that you want to bring out, and then you need to potentially employ a graphic designer to then make it look beautiful, so that your key message can come out big and strong and be clearly understood by your audience. And you've got a much broader audience here, and so clarity is so important to have. So they're the kind of the three key ones. I'm now going to talk largely about dashboards, because that's pretty much what most people come to me for, and also what a lot of our clients typically ask for when we're working with data analysis. If we can go on to the next slide, please, Colin. So one of the things that we need to consider when we're designing these dashboards is this kind of concept called guided analytics. And because we've got market researchers on the call, it's very similar to almost how you design interview guidelines or a survey. So you start big and then you narrow down to key pieces of information. So the key things that we need to do are look at three different things, and I've identified these here. So the dashboard, it needs to be intuitive, and that it's simple for someone to pick up, so they can look at that dashboard for the first time and it answers their initial question, and they can then continue their understanding and ask more questions if they need to. So that's where it's kind of going into more detail if they request that. So the next part is that it actually needs to be insightful. So it needs to show them what that key information is, and understanding what is the important message and how we're going to answer it. And then the final point, which is kind of often forgotten, but not by people like Colin and I, is making it scalable. And that's how we can actually make it quick, fast, so that when a user clicks on a button, something happens straight away, and it's not thinking and thinking for 30 seconds as it's trying to work out the answer. So there's lots of different techniques that we can use to make that happen. But it all starts with having a really good understanding of what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to do it. So Colin, if you could go on to the next slide for me, let's actually jump into a real example. So here's a figure. So someone tells you the answer is 16.1 million units. This is all about market share. So the next question that you have in your brain is that good? Is that bad? And so we can then, as the visual analysts, we can then say, well, what's the next thing that we need to show? So here we're then showing the growth since last year is down 10.5%. Oh, I didn't indicate what BAN meant. So does anyone know what BAN means? Or a ban? Is anyone familiar with this term? Pop it in the chat if you want to have a go. So give you one more second. No, it's a big ass number. So big ass numbers are really good for showing off the key thing. It draws your attention, you're looking at the biggest thing first, and that's what it is. So it's an American term, as you can probably guess, but it's quite common in the visualization world. So coming back to this, sorry, so you've got your big number, this is what it is. It then tells you it's gone down, and then the next thing is that a blip or is that an ongoing trend in the research? So that's when we then show the trend lines in this particular example. The next thing you want to do is kind of break that down into more detail. So here I'm then showing the most important dimension of the data, which is all the different brands and how are they broken down into the data. So the way that I've presented this here is that I've ordered the top brands. I've shown the biggest one first, and then gone down in descending order based on volume. That little line is where it was last year, and then we're using color coding to indicate how it's changed significantly. And this is where the color coding is really powerful, because with a dashboard, you're looking for change. Hopefully it's something you're looking at once a month to kind of go, what's new this month, what's different. And so using color here and the intensity of that color, your eye, well, at least my eye, is drawn straight away to sweet cabbage. Sweet cabbage units have gone down because that's got the deepest red intensity color. And so your eye is drawn to that. Maybe they should change their name. So the next thing so you've seen that that's gone down, you then want to know by how much. And so that's where you want to provide even more interactivity to go, what's going on with sweet cabbage? Maybe I should really find a better name. And so you can then kind of really get into the detail behind it that way. So each time we're presenting a number or presenting something and then preempting what the next question is going to be to guide people through the dashboard in an intuitive way. And to do this requires always quite a lot of iteration as well, and with the design. And so when I first started, again, doing data visualization, I had the role of trying to encourage everyone to be able to make these visualizations themselves. And so we rolled out Tableau to be used across the company in the ambition that everyone be able to use it and it will be fantastic. And we're producing all these insights all over the place and it would be like the best thing ever. Our clients would be delighted. And so what we had is people with extreme business knowledge. They knew their industry inside out, and we were trying to make them dashboard creators. Now, so it's in that little Venn diagram, it's number one. We were trying to make number one. So that kind of joint of knowledge and being able to build things in Tableau. Now, the challenge is that things like Tableau or Power BI or whatever tool you're using, they have quite a steep learning curve. The salespeople make it look very easy, but in reality, when you're trying to do things which are client ready and perfect, it takes a bit more time. And so we weren't able to really make it work. We weren't able to turn business knowledge people into these dashboard creators because it was missing a step. And the step that was missing was actually how to design these things in the first place. And so we kind of moved and shifted people away from actually learning how to use the program, and instead actually where their thoughts be better placed and where their skills be better placed and enhancing is actually how to design one of these dashboards. So taking people through that process. And so the way that our business structure was structured is that the salespeople to be able to talk to the end client, the people who are going to use it. And so that was the kind of perfect opportunity to find out what do they want from a dashboard. And so we started teaching people that point too. So how can we make our salespeople almost dashboard designers so that then they could give us a better brief in terms of how we build one of these dashboards. And then the point three, that kind of skill set of dashboard creator and dashboard designer, that's kind of me and Colin. So we've got years and years of experience of designing these dashboards, but we don't know everything about the business that you're asking. So we could one day doing a staff survey for a public health department, or the next day we could be doing a brand health study in a really diverse market. So we don't have the industry knowledge, but what we do have is being able to build the dashboards and how to design them. So it's kind of, how can we kind of join that little gap in terms of designing these dashboards better? Oh, and by the way, that little bit in the middle that says business knowledge, design, dashboard creator and dashboard designer, they're unicorns. They don't exist. Find me one of those and I'll be amazed. So what I designed is this thing called the one-page dashboard design. And it kind of takes the old cliche of designing something on the back of a fag packet. And what I wanted is a low skill, low requirements. You don't need PowerPoint or anything like that. You just need a piece of paper and a pen. And so the idea is that you then divide up your page into these kind of boxes. So and then the order of these boxes is very important too. So the first thing you absolutely need to do is understand what the objective of this thing is and who's going to use it. So who's the objective and who's the audience? The more prescriptive you can be in that box, I mean, it should be a really big box really, so that you can actually be more prescriptive. But what is the most important thing that people need to do when they open this view or this visualization? The next thing is, what comparisons are they looking to make? So are they looking to see how brands have compared this month? Or are they looking to see how brands have changed during this month? Or are they looking to see how demographics are different between different things? So what are the key things which they're trying to see the differences in? Understanding that will actually then later inform which different visualizations we use or what interactivity we provide. The third point is actually the data, pretty important. But are we just using, as in most market research, kind of survey data, but also, or are we kind of complementing that with CRM data or kind of their sales data to really to add extra context to that market research? Are there other kind of sources of information that we need to consider? Again, it's really important to understand that as someone who's going to start building this dashboard. Then there's the style, and this is kind of looking at how you're going to use it. So does it need to be on a mobile device? Does it need to actually be able to print and go into a PowerPoint deck? Again, understanding these things will have a big impact in actually the final product. Kind of a good example is if you design a very nice interactive dashboard that looks all pretty, but actually the end user wants to print it for a report, it means you can't really rely on the hover overing and the tooltips, which are usually very useful for an interactive dashboard. So having that knowledge and foresight at the start, again, influences how you're going to design that dashboard. So those top 4 boxes are kind of crucial to how you, almost like the foundations for your dashboard. And then the filters, the measures, the dimensions, and the business logic are then starting to get into the detail. So filters, do you want to filter by gender? Do you want to filter by age group? Do you want to filter by the different manufacturers of all the different brands that you have, for example? The dimensions are then, it's quite a big overlap between filters and dimensions. So sometimes you may want to also have the ability to see things by gender and compare genders on the same time, but other times you may not want to. So we have that 2 distinctions there. And then the measures, so what do you want to actually show on the chart? Do you want to show percentages? Do you want to show volume? That kind of information. And then the business logic is how I describe the weird stuff. So what's kind of really odd about the data? So is it that there was a wave missing, or like 1 month we didn't get any data because it didn't exist, the system went down? Or is it that the underlying data has some quirks and only these people in China saw these brands and the people in India saw those brands, but the people in Japan saw both brands? So you get some kind of weirdness that kind of typically happens in real life situations. And so that business logic is there just to capture all of that last part. And then once we kind of filled in all of those boxes around the side, we can then start to think and brainstorm about what goes in the middle. So if your client has had a wacky idea that they want some crazy chart that goes in the middle, then they can start to actually literally draw it in that box. So then give an indication for how that visualization is going to be used. So here's a worked example that's been very nicely prepared. So just going through. So here we've got the objective is for senior management and to understand the chocolate bar market. Wonderful. So again, it's identifying who that person is and then what questions are they going to want to answer from this dashboard. This may evolve a little bit, but again, the more prescriptive you can be, the better. The worst ones are, I want to be able to show all the questions to everyone. It just won't work. It'll be useless to everyone. So the more specific you can be, the better. Then there's the key comparisons part. So what things do we want to change to compare? So in this one, we're actually also looking at seasonality rather than just year-on-year trend, because there could be a big seasonality element to the data. For here, we've got the data, so it's point of sale, there's the brand catalog. So that all needs to come in. And then the style, do we want to use the brand guidelines or do we want to use something different? What screen resolution? I mean, you can get really detailed here in terms of the information that you put in. And then here I've just put in some filters, measures, and dimensions. And then here's a kind of an example of business logic, which it just kind of typically happens all the time. So again, with brand health research, if you do things like that, often manufacturers acquire other businesses, and it kind of completely mucks up all of your tracking because, you know, do you change back the previous ones? Do you stick with what you want? So having that clarity will impact how you store the data and how you represent it on the screen. And then once we filled all those things in, here I've kind of just started playing around with how we can actually visualize that. And you can grab different examples. So I will just sketch how it's going to look. And the benefit of doing this is that the more you can do this actually with a piece of paper, or I've done it before with whiteboards and you have workshops, it's so much easier to just rub something out and then put in something else than going through iterations and iterations of dashboard development, which may take 2-week cycles between each one, and it just completely stagnates the process. I've seen it so often. Whereas this way, it's quick, it's fast, and you get instant feedback on whether that's going to work. So that's the whole kind of premise around this one-page dashboard design. So if you can take away one thing from this meeting, I'd go for that. Just be able to draw that simple page on your piece of paper. And so when your client asks for a dashboard, you can actually start to spec out what is it they want it to achieve. So just to recap what we've covered during this webinar. So Colin started us off when we looked at the principles of how our brains perceive different images and what areas we can actually really tap into to present data better. We then introduced tools like the data ink ratio to ensure that we show the data as clearly as possible. This is a principle which I use beyond just doing data visualizations. Also use it in things like PowerPoint or reports or Word reports that I'm doing. You kind of just ask yourself the question of, is that actually adding any value? Can I make it clearer? And so it really kind of helps me with that thought process. Then the third thing that we went through is actually the different design considerations for building dashboards or any kind of visualization in general. What are the things that we need to consider to make it both intuitive, insightful, and scalable? And then that final thing is just providing a simple tool for designing a new visualization. So that kind of really wraps it up very quickly. So Colin and I had to kind of condense almost like a day-long course to trying to cover all into this session. So there's vast amounts, and we could talk for days about how this all comes together and the different nuances that you can have in data visualization. I suppose the guiding thing is that we're here if you do have any questions. So I suppose the closing remark is data visualization an art or a science? I'm a mathematician at heart. I'm not creative at all. I would see it as a science. It's something that can be learned and not to be feared. And there's lots of principles that you can apply, but there's also that ability to that kind of creativity to create something new. Colin, I don't know if you want to add in your point of view on the topic as well.
Yeah, so I'd take it that I think it's a science, but it's also an art. So one of the terms in data visualization is that it depends. I think the science is how we saw about how we, visual perceptions and how our brains work in terms of processing information. And we saw how we can use that, leverage that in the design of our chart. So I think that's the kind of like the scientific part to, in terms of like getting our audience to see what we want them to see without them even knowing it. But I think the art is how we then sort of focus them in on key points, and through things like data storytelling. So, we've explored the data in the dashboard, but then we want to explain it maybe in a, in a PowerPoint. And the art is then, how we can, what we want our audience to do with that information. What actions do we want them to take? So I think it's a little bit of both. It sits for me neatly in between the two.
Brilliant, thank you. We had a question come in from Mike Brown as well on the chat. So I'm just going through that. So how do you decide the design for dashboards when a lot of users will access the tool via mobile, a phone or a tablet, essentially using touch rather than a keypad to navigate the system? Does it make a difference? Do you want to have a go at that, Colin, or would you like me to?
Yeah. So, I mean, in a tool like Tableau, you have a default sort of layout when you design a dashboard, which is typically suited to a desktop view, but then you can add in tablet views and mobile views, and you build 3 separate views. And then when you publish it to the web, say Tableau Public, then when your users going on a desktop, they see the desktop view. When they're going on a tablet, they see the tablet view. And when they're going on a mobile phone, they see the mobile view. And Tableau will sort of create an automatic view for a mobile, but it quite often looks a bit terrible, to be honest. So we have to kind of go in and redesign it and optimize it for mobile. And what that means is stripping out even more information that we don't need, and maybe shrinking down some of the elements so that it fits nicely in a mobile layout, so that as you scroll through on your phone, you can still get the same functionality, you get the same sort of insights, but in a much smaller real estate space. And I think that's where that kind of data ink ratio and removing visual clutter becomes even more important. But yeah, definitely designed with device in mind.
Yeah, and I would say just make buttons easy to press as well. So don't have anything too fiddly. So you want to be able to just hit the thing. Yeah, having that in mind as well, it reduces the amount of almost your canvas on the mobile, but it just makes it easier to navigate. And so there's that kind of creative tension of getting that balance. I think we've answered your question, Mike, so that's great. Does anybody else have any questions? We've kind of purposely rattled through it so we could answer any more questions that you have.
I have a question. Can I just do it, I guess?
Hi, Barbara.
Hi. Thanks. That was really interesting. And I was wondering, like, if you have filled in that template and you've gathered all the useful information and you're ready to work on the middle part, like how does it look? Do you have any recommendations or tips on how, because there's still lots of ways in how you can then actually design it, right? How you find inspiration for that?
Yeah, great question. So I suppose from a process point of view, the next step I would do from what we've just done is actually mock that visualization up as quickly as possible. So it's still kind of top of mind for the person who's created it. So if you created that model with your client, if you can then almost a couple of days later, or even shorter than that, is ideal, saying this is what it looks like, and then get that instant feedback of is it good or not. There's also just so much content out there these days of different ways of creatively representing data. So there's information is beautiful, there's books, there's awards every year of different ways of doing it, and there's always different visualizations coming out. You then sometimes have the challenge that the software that you're using can't do that yet. So you have that kind of creative tension as well. It's just like, that's really good, that's a really brilliant way of representing the data, but it's going to take a while and I don't know how to do it. Or you can do it like this and present it that way. I think that really comes in our experience of doing these dashboards, is knowing what's going to be quick to create, fast to maintain, and getting that balance. Colin, I don't know if you want to add as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, like, yeah, if you go on, I mean, if you're a Tableau user, Tableau Public, that has a really active global community. There's thousands of visualizations of all different topics, and some of them are kind of graphic design quality if you need to go to that end of it. But I think for me, often it will be like in terms of that storyboarding and wireframing is using sticky notes as well, just to kind of get your ideas down on a piece of paper, like Andrew showed us. And that's quite powerful because one of the things about sort of using any sort of software package is it tends to confine our creativity a little bit. We want to make it look as complete and nice as possible, Whereas using pen and paper or sticky notes, you can just iterate very quickly. You can move the stickies around and get the order of story that you're trying to tell, which is really, really useful.
Yeah, makes complete sense. And but like for me to like, I completely agree with like paper and pen is also often very good to like not be restrained by, I don't know, by the options in somewhat. But for this topic, I would find it difficult with pen and paper because it's relative, like I restrain maybe what I know. So do you have sort of your favorite sources where you think like that is really where you can find great stuff, or books that you recommend reading if you're interested in this
Yeah,
topic?
I mean, there's on Tableau Public, there's a Tableau visionary who's one of the best visionaries, are like the most skilled people in the world at Tableau. But there's Andy Kriebel. He has something called the Visual Vocabulary, which has been viewed millions of times, and it's based on a similar exercise that the Financial Times did. And it literally goes through all the different types of data visualization scenarios. So, if you're looking at a correlation, or you want to show ranking or magnitude or trends over time or part to whole, and it will have 3 or 4 different examples of charts, standard types of charts that you could build. So, whether it's like a line chart, if you want to look at trends over time, or bar charts for magnitude, etc. So that's a really, really good resource, and there's many like that. In terms of books, some of the stuff I showed this morning was taken from a book called Storytelling with Data by Cole Nasbama-Knaflic, which I would really recommend for telling better data stories in a business scenario. And she does all of her stuff, I think, just in Excel. So I'd really recommend that. And also, I've been reading a book called The Big Picture by Steve Wexler, which is aimed at people who don't make charts. It's actually aimed at people who consume them in terms of data literacy. So, but I mean, yeah, there's a lot of different great books out there, and if you want to kind of get into this.
Cool, thanks.
Can I ask a quick question? Do you guys also do infographics, or do you specialize really in dashboards?
Personally, I don't specialize in infographics. I think it's better suited for a graphic designer. However, you need to do the analysis first, as I mentioned before.
Yeah.
And once you've got your analysis, engage a graphic designer. Don't do it the other way around. Don't ask a graphic designer to create your numbers. They won't like it. And I mean, to some extent, when you're designing the infographic, there are some almost like containers that they would work within. So they would need to know what your color palette's going to be, what your brand style is going to be, what the general themes are, and then also what the numbers and what the key message is. So you'd need to provide them with that information. Once they've got that, then they can let their creative juices flow and design you the right copy. But personally, for me, I work in the dashboard space and allowing people to interact with all the data rather than just the snippet.
Yeah, and I'm the same. I sort of work in the dashboard space, but also maybe then some of that data storytelling. But I wouldn't say I'm a sort of infographic designer. People who kind of there's someone called Caroline Bevin who's a really good infographic designer, and she will use Tableau to scale the charts, as Andrew says, to create them, to make sure that the values are represented accurately, but then go into something like Adobe Illustrator to make it look that kind of infographic style. I think one of the problems you have with infographics is where, like as Andrew said, you're creating the charts just in the graphics package, and they're not scaled accurately, and they can be a little bit misleading. There is some overlap though, in terms of like a good infographic will have a good story to tell, it will have a good structure, it will have a good visual hierarchy, it will employ a lot of the same color techniques, but I think it's trying to tell a story and engage the audience using things like icons and pictures. So where we're looking at the chart junk and use of images, when we design dashboards, we try and kind of minimize those as much, whereas you know, an infographic designer might want to pull some of those in because they're trying to evoke emotion or engage with a particular audience. So there are some subtle differences as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from those that are left here? No. Okay, well, thank you very much, both of you. It's been really interesting, very fascinating, particularly for those of us who do some quant research. Can we have your slides? Is that possible, so that we can put that on with the recording of the webinar? I think that people would find that useful too.
Yep, certainly.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Okay, so it just remains to say thank you very much to both of you. Thank you to everybody for logging in today. Do come and join us for one of our future webinars, and have a great afternoon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.